My granddaughter was 19 when they arrested her for drug trafficking. They said they found 2 kilos in the trunk of the car she was driving. Everyone told me the same thing. She did it. The police, the lawyers, even her own public defender. They pushed a plea deal across the table like it was mercy. 12 years. Sign it or risk 20. But when I looked into my granddaughter's eyes, I didn't see a criminal. I saw fear. I saw a girl who had been used. And I knew deep in my bones she was telling the truth. So I did something nobody expected from a 70-year-old grandmother. I went back to the same prison where I worked for 30 years. Not to visit her. Not to comfort her. But to prove she didn't do it. And the first time I saw her inside, she had a bruise on her face. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She whispered, "Grandma, I don't belong here." That's when I promised her one thing. I'm going to get you out. But the moment I started asking questions, a guard began watching me. Then a note showed up in my mailbox. Stop asking questions. Because someone didn't just frame my granddaughter. They thought they could scare me into silence. They were wrong. My name is. And this is the story of how I walked back into prison to expose the man who destroyed her life. The phone rang at 2:00 in the morning. And the moment I heard that sound, my whole body went cold. You don't work inside a prison for 30 years without learning what a middle-of-the-night call means. It means someone's life just changed. I reached for the receiver with a hand that suddenly felt too heavy. Mrs. Fletcher, a young man's voice. Official, trained, the kind of voice that doesn't break no matter what words it carries. Yes. This is Officer Jones with County Police. Your granddaughter, Sophie Fletcher, has been arrested. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I sat up in bed, staring into the dark. The only light was the soft blue glow of the alarm clock, 2:00 a.m. like the universe was mocking me. What's the charge? I asked. Drug trafficking, ma'am. She's being held without bail until arraignment. Drug trafficking. My granddaughter. 19 years old. And in that moment, I felt something snap inside me. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. Like the last thread holding my quiet life together had been cut. I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said. Then I hung up. I didn't cry, not yet. I moved on instinct. Shoes, coat, keys. I didn't even turn on the lights. I just walked through my house like I'd done it 1,000 times before, only this time I wasn't walking toward a prison job. I was walking toward a nightmare. As I drove, the streets were empty. Streetlights flickered on wet pavement. The world was sleeping. But my world was ending. And I kept thinking the same question over and over. How did we get here? Because Sophie wasn't perfect, no. But she wasn't a trafficker. She wasn't the kind of girl who ran drugs for fun. That didn't fit. Not in my bones, not in my spirit. And I know what some people are thinking right now. Grandmothers always say that. They always defend the kid. They never want to see the truth. But I'm not one of those grandmothers. I spent 3 decades inside a prison. I've looked guilty people in the eyes. I've listened to excuses. I've watched lies fall apart. And I also know something most people don't. Sometimes the system gets it wrong. Sometimes the innocent ones are the easiest to break. I pulled into the police station parking lot, and my hands were shaking so hard I had to sit in the car for a second before I could even open the door. Inside, the air smelled like old coffee and cold metal. They put me in a small gray waiting room with plastic chairs and buzzing fluorescent lights that made everything look sickly. No window, no warmth, no mercy. Just waiting. And waiting in silence is its own kind of torture. After what felt like a lifetime, an officer opened the door. She's coming out now. My heart jumped into my throat. And then Sophie stepped into the room wearing handcuffs. My granddaughter looked like she'd been dropped into a storm. Her hair was tangled, her cheeks were wet, mascara streaked down her face like she'd been crying for hours. When she saw me, her mouth opened like she wanted to say something, but no sound came out. Then finally, "Grandma." Her voice cracked on the first word. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I swear to you I didn't know." I stood up so fast the chair scraped the floor. "Sophie," I said low and firm, "don't say anything else. Not one more word, not until you have a lawyer." But she couldn't stop. It all spilled out of her like panic. Brandon asked me to take the car to his friend's place. He told me he needed to put something in the trunk. "Just a package, Grandma." He said it was for work. Her eyes were wide and terrified. "And I didn't ask," she choked. "I didn't ask what it was." That's when I felt it. That awful, sinking feeling. Not because I believed she was guilty, but because I knew exactly what this sounded like to police. Exactly what it sounded like to prosecutors. Exactly what it sounded like to the public defender who would be assigned next. It sounded like the oldest excuse in the book. And Sophie didn't realize yet that truth and believable are not the same thing. Before I could reach her, an officer stepped forward and pulled her away. "Time's up." "She's a kid," I snapped, my voice louder than I meant it to be. The officer didn't even flinch. She was just another case number to them. But to me, she was the little girl who used to sleep with one arm wrapped around my neck like she was afraid I'd disappear. I watched her get let out. And I swear to you, it felt like watching someone close a door on my entire life. 20 minutes later, a detective came in. Tall man, tired eyes, a face that looked like he'd stopped being surprised by human suffering years ago. "Mrs. Fletcher," he said, flipping open a notepad, "your granddaughter was pulled over for a broken tail light." I blinked. A tail light. He nodded like it was nothing. During the search, officers found 2 kilograms of cocaine in the trunk. 2 kilograms. My mouth went dry. "That's trafficking quantity," he continued. "Serious charge." I stared at him and couldn't even hear my own thoughts. Then I found my voice again. "Where's Brandon Cole?" I asked. The detective looked up. "The boyfriend." "Yes." He shook his head. "We don't have a current address. Phone disconnected. No solid employment records. Seems he doesn't want to be found." Of course he didn't. Because men like that. Men who show up smooth and charming, with expensive cars and empty promises. They always vanish when consequences arrive. I left the station with my stomach twisted into a knot. And as I drove home at dawn, I realized something that hit harder than the arrest itself. Sophie wasn't just caught. She was alone. And the system loves lonely people. Now here's the part I haven't told many people. Sophie didn't come into my life as a baby. She came into my life as a 6-year-old, after I buried my daughter. My daughter, Claire, died of an overdose when Sophie was 6. Heroines. One bad choice after another, until there were no choices left. And the phone call I got that day. That call broke me in a way I never fully recovered from. But there was a child. A little girl with angry eyes who didn't understand why her mother wasn't coming home. And I became her guardian. Her grandmother. Her only parent. And Sophie hated me for it. Not because I was cruel. Not because I didn't love her. But because grief has nowhere to go sometimes, so it turns into rage. I was strict, I had to be. I'd seen what happens when young people get loose in the wrong crowd. I had seen it in prison. I had seen it in my own daughter. So I tried to keep Sophie safe. But the older she got, the more she treated my rules like chains. By 17, we barely spoke without arguing. She stayed out late, came home smelling like smoke and something worse, hung around people who made my skin crawl. And 6 months before her arrest, she met Brandon. He was 24, too old for her, too smooth, too confident. He drove a car that cost more than I made in a year. And the first time he walked into my house with flowers and that polite smile, I felt it. That warning deep in my gut. The kind of warning you only get when you've watched hundreds of criminals learn how to look harmless. He's not good for you, I told her the moment he left. You don't know him, she snapped. I know his type. She stared at me like I was her enemy. You don't want me to be happy, she said. You never have. That was the last real conversation we had before she was arrested. So when I walked into that courthouse 3 days later and met her public defender, I already knew what was coming. Her name was Nancy Winters, younger than I expected, a tired briefcase in one hand and a look in her eyes that said she'd already decided what Sophie was. We stood in the hallway outside the courtroom. And Nancy didn't waste time. Your granddaughter should take the plea deal, she said. Just like that. No softness, no curiosity, no let's explore the facts. Straight to surrender. If she goes to trial and loses, Nancy continued, she could get 15 to 20 years. The DA is offering 12 if she pleads guilty. I stared at her. She says she didn't know, I said. Nancy looked at me like I was naive. Mrs. Fletcher, the drugs were in the car she was driving. That's possession with intent. And the boyfriend did it story. She sighed. That's what everyone says. I felt heat rise in my chest. Sometimes it's true. Nancy's expression didn't change. I've been doing this for 5 years, she said. I've never seen a case where the boyfriend story held up, not once. Then she added the sentence that made me want to scream. Your granddaughter is lucky she's getting 12. Lucky. Like losing your youth inside concrete walls is a gift. Sophie took the plea deal. Not because she was guilty. Because she was terrified. Because when the people who are supposed to defend you don't believe you, you start doubting your own memories. The judge accepted it on a Tuesday afternoon in October. And when Sophie looked back at me from the defendant's table, I didn't see a criminal. I saw that little girl again. The one who crawled into my bed after nightmares and whispered, "Don't leave me." I went home to an empty house and sat at my kitchen table until the sun went down. And that's when I made the decision. A decision that would shock everyone who knew me. A decision that would pull me back into the very place I'd spent my life trying to leave behind. Because I wasn't just going to visit Sophie. I wasn't just going to pray. I wasn't just going to accept the story everyone else believed. No. If the world wanted to bury my granddaughter alive, then I was going back into that prison to dig her out. And I didn't care who tried to stop me. Because I knew something they didn't. Sophie wasn't the first young woman this had happened to. And if I was right, there was a predator out there who had been doing this for years. And he had no idea what kind of grandmother he'd just made an enemy. I didn't sleep the night after Sophie took the plea. I tried. I lay in bed with the blanket pulled up to my chin, staring at the ceiling like it might give me answers. But all I could see was Sophie's face at that table in court. 19 years old. Already being boxed into a story she didn't write. By sunrise, I was at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that tasted like ash. And I made my decision the same way I made the hardest choices in my life. Quietly. Without asking anyone's permission. Before Claire was born, I was in law school. Second year. I had big dreams back then. I wanted to be the kind of lawyer who defended people everyone else gave up on. Then I got pregnant, dropped out, and raised my daughter alone. Life doesn't ask if you're ready. It just drops responsibility into your lap and watches what you do with it. I took the first job I could find with benefits, working in the prison library. And for 30 years, I walked those halls, pushed those carts, watched the system chew people up. I retired at 65 thinking I'd earned my peace. 2 years later, at 67, I learned peace is something the world can take back anytime. The morning after the plea, I called the prison administration office. The woman on the phone sounded surprised, and then pleased. "Fletcher," she said, "oh my goodness, we'd love to have you back." "Not as staff," I replied, "as a volunteer." A pause. "Then when can you start?" "As soon as you'll let me." They approved me in 2 weeks. They always needed volunteers. And my name still carried weight in that building. Sophie had been transferred to the women's facility, an hour north. The same prison where I'd spent most of my career. I knew the layout like the back of my hand. I knew which doors stuck, which corners had blind spots, which guards talked too much. And I knew something else too. Prisons are like small towns. Everyone knows everyone's business. Which meant if there was a lie behind Sophie's case, the truth had to be somewhere inside those walls. My first volunteer shift was scheduled for Tuesday afternoon. But before that, I had visiting hours. Saturday morning, 9 a.m. I dressed like I was going to church. Not because I wanted to look nice. Because prisons respect one thing more than kindness. They respect confidence. And I wasn't walking in there like a scared old woman. I was walking in like someone who belonged. The visiting room smelled exactly the same as I remembered. Disinfectant, bad coffee, cold air that never felt fully clean. A guard checked my ID and waved me through. Then I waited. And when Sophie finally walked in, my stomach dropped. Orange scrubs that hung off her like she was a child wearing an adult's clothes. Her hair pulled back tight, no makeup, face pale. And on her left cheekbone, a purple bruise. Not small. Not faint. A bruise that looked like a hand had left its mark. I stood up so fast my chair almost tipped. "What happened to your face?" I asked. Sophie didn't look at me. "Nothing." I stepped closer. "Sophie." She finally sat down across from me, eyes fixed on the table. Her hands were shaking. I'd seen that shake before. Not in guilty people. In people who are terrified. "You're not fine," I said. Her voice cracked, "I'm fine." But the last word broke like glass. I lowered my voice. "Look at me." Slowly, she lifted her eyes. And what I saw there wasn't my stubborn teenage granddaughter. It wasn't the angry girl who slammed doors and told me I didn't understand her life. It was someone learning how small she could make herself to stay alive. "Nobody believes me," she whispered. "I do," I said without hesitation. Her face folded. She put her head in her hands and started crying, big gasping sobs that made people glance over. A guard shifted by the door, watching. I reached across the table and touched Sophie's arm. The guard didn't stop me. Maybe he recognized me. Maybe he didn't care. Either way, I didn't let go. "Listen to me," I said. "You're going to survive this, but you need to do exactly what I tell you." She nodded, wiping her face with the back of her sleeve like she was embarrassed for being human. "First rule," I said, "keep your head down, don't make friends too fast, and don't make enemies at all." Sophie swallowed. "Someone already hates me." My jaw tightened. "Who?" "I don't know," she whispered. "Lunch line." I looked up at the wrong time, She pushed me and I fell into the table. My chest burned. And you didn't fight back. She shook her head quickly. No, I apologized. Good, I said firm. You did the right thing, don't fight unless you have no choice. She stared at me like she was trying to memorize my words. Second rule, I continued. Stay out of the common areas when you can, find a routine, a safe place. She frowned, like what? The library, I said. Her eyes widened slightly. I know the staff there, I'll talk to them, you can volunteer, reshelve books, check returns, anything. Sophie's shoulders dropped just a little, like she could finally breathe. The library is quieter, I added. Less drama, fewer predators, more cameras, more staff. It's not perfect, but it's better. She nodded, okay. We spent the rest of the visit going over survival like it was a class. Where to sit in the cafeteria. How to keep your face neutral when someone tries to provoke you. Which guards might help, and which ones enjoyed watching inmates suffer. What to do if someone offers you something. What to do if someone threatens you. And the whole time, Sophie listened like her life depended on it. Because it did. When visiting hours ended, the guard called time. Sophie stood up slowly, eyes still red. Before she walked away, she leaned in and whispered. Grandma, I don't belong here. I held her gaze. I know, I whispered back, and I'm going to prove it. She blinked hard. Then she was gone. Led out by a guard, like she was already a memory. I walked out of that prison with my jaw clenched, so tight it hurt. And as I drove home, one thought pounded in my skull like a drum. Surviving wasn't enough. I needed proof. Proof that Brandon existed. Proof that he used Sophie. Proof that Sophie was just a delivery girl who didn't even know she was carrying poison. And the moment I started thinking about proof, I realized the scariest truth of all. If Sophie was telling the truth, then Brandon didn't just disappear. He walked away clean. Which meant he was still out there. And if he did it once, he'd do it again. That night, I pulled out my old law books. The ones I hadn't touched in 40 years. Criminal procedure, evidence, constitutional law. I stacked them on the floor like bricks. And I made myself a promise. I wasn't going back into that prison to play volunteer. I was going back in to investigate. To connect dots no one else cared to connect. To find the truth hiding in plain sight. Because the system had already decided Sophie's story didn't matter. So I was going to make it matter. And I didn't know it yet. But the moment I stepped back behind those gates as a volunteer, someone inside would notice. Someone who didn't want the truth found. Someone who had power. And once they started watching me, my quiet little investigation would turn into something dangerous. Because the next time I saw Sophie, she wasn't the only one shaking. I was too. My first volunteer shift was Tuesday. 3 to 7 in the afternoon. I got up before sunrise like I used to, even though I didn't need to. Old habits don't die when you've lived them for 30 years. I wore plain clothes, no jewelry, no bright colors, nothing that drew attention. And before I left the house, I stood by the door and took one slow breath. Because walking back into that prison felt like walking back into a life I'd already buried. The drive north was quiet. Trees, fields, gray sky. And then, like a scar on the horizon, the prison appeared, tall fences, razor wire, guard towers. A place designed to remind you who has power. As I pulled into the parking lot, my hands tightened around the steering wheel. I told myself I wasn't afraid. But my body didn't believe me. Inside, the security process was the same as always: metal detector, ID check, a guard who barely looked up. But the sound. That sound still hit me like a punch. the heavy doors clanging shut behind you, one after another. Like the world saying, "You're not in control anymore." The volunteer coordinator greeted me with a smile. "We're so glad you're back." I smiled back politely, but my eyes were already scanning the room. Faces, uniforms, body language. Prison teaches you to read people fast. They handed me my volunteer badge and led me to the library. And when I stepped inside, it was like time folded in on itself. Same rows of books, same scuffed tables, same old computer stations that always looked slightly broken. The library had been my safe zone for decades. The one place in that building where things felt almost human. A younger librarian named Ms. ran the desk now. She recognized me immediately. "You're Fletcher," she said, surprised. "I've heard about you." I kept my tone light, hopefully all good things. She laughed. "They said you ran this place like clockwork." "I just loved my job," I said. That part was true. But that wasn't why I was here now. I started the shift the same way I used to. Pushing a cart of books. Checking the returns bin. Straightening shelves. And for the first hour, I did nothing else. No questions, no starring, no digging. Because the first rule of surviving inside a prison is you don't look like you're doing anything special. Then halfway through the shift, I saw her. Sophie. She was behind the desk, stamping due dates like she'd been doing it her whole life. Hair in a tight bun, eyes down, shoulders stiff. And when she glanced up and saw me, her face didn't change. But her eyes did. For 1 second, I saw relief. Then she looked away quickly, like she remembered where she was. We didn't speak. We couldn't. Not in a room full of women who would notice anything unusual. So I did what I always did in prison. I spoke without words. I nodded once. A tiny nod that meant, "I'm here, I'm not leaving." Sophie nodded back. And that was enough. For now. As the afternoon went on, inmates drifted in and out, some reading, some looking for legal paperwork, some just escaping noise. I watched quietly, keeping my movements normal. But I listened. Not like a nosy volunteer. Like a woman trying to find a thread in a pile of tangled rope. That's when I noticed her. A young woman, sitting alone at one of the tables, with a stack of romance novels. Early 20s, brown hair in a braid, quiet posture, eyes that kept flicking toward the door like she didn't trust anyone. I recognized that look. Not fear. Not guilt. That look was watching for danger. I rolled my cart closer, pretending to straighten a shelf near her. And then she spoke, without looking up. "You used to work here, right?" I froze for half a beat, then answered casually. "That's right." She finally looked at me. "I thought so, I remember you." My heart thumped. "Do you?" I asked gently. She nodded. "3 years ago, you helped me find a book about starting a business." And suddenly, I did remember her. Back then she looked hopeful, like she still believed her life would be something. Now she looked older than she should. "How's that business going?" I asked. She laughed softly, but there was no joy in it. "Not great, considering where I ended up." I didn't push. In prison, people tell you what they're ready to tell you. I just set a book on the shelf and said, "What's your name?" "Crystal," she replied. "Crystal Martinez." I nodded. "Nice to see you again, Crystal." She hesitated. Then, like she'd been holding it in her chest for a long time. "I'm in here for drug trafficking." My fingers tightened around the cart handle. I kept my face neutral. "That's a hard one," I said. Crystal's eyes dropped to the table. "Caught with my boyfriend's stash in my apartment," she muttered. "He told me it was protein powder, for his gym thing." My stomach turned. Where is he now? I asked, calm, like I was asking about the weather. Crystal's lips pressed into a bitter line. Gone, she said. Different state, different number, different life. My pulse started climbing, but I forced my voice to stay steady. What was his name? Crystal shrugged. Jason Miller, at least that's what he told me. I swallowed. And what did he look like? She thought for a moment, then said, tall, brown hair, always dressed sharp, drove a BMW like he was rich. Then she added something that made my blood run cold. And he had this little tattoo on his wrist, a star, left wrist. A star. Left wrist. I felt like the floor moved under me. Because Sophie had told me, Brandon had a tattoo too small on his wrist. She hadn't described it in detail. She'd been too shaken back then. But in my mind, something clicked into place like a lock turning. Different name. Same car. Same type. Same disappearance. Same story. And now, the same tattoo. I didn't react, I couldn't. Prison is full of eyes. So I simply nodded, as if this was just sad conversation between two women. I'm sorry, I said quietly. Crystal's shoulders lifted in a tired shrug. Public defender didn't even try to find him, said there wasn't proof he existed. She let out a slow breath. So I took the plea deal, because I was scared. That word scared hit me hard. Because it was the same reason Sophie took hers. Not guilt. Fear. When my shift ended, I walked out of the prison with my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and didn't turn the key. I just stared at my hands on the steering wheel. Because now it wasn't just Sophie. Now it was a pattern. And patterns don't happen by accident. That night, I went home and pulled out a notebook. Not a cute journal. Not something with flowers. A plain, hardcover notebook, like the ones I used to keep records in at work. I wrote at the top of the first page. Brandon Cole, real name unknown. Then below it. Crystal Martinez, boyfriend, Jason Miller, BMW, star tattoo left wrist, disappeared. My pen shook slightly. I hated that it did. Because it meant I was right. And being right was terrifying. I didn't sleep much. The next few weeks, I moved carefully. I asked Crystal questions only when it was safe. Where did they meet? What restaurants did he like? Did he ever mention family? Did he use the same phone number the whole time? Every detail mattered. And the more Crystal answered, the more my stomach sank. Because her story matched Sophie's like they were copies. Same charm, same rushed love, same small favor. Then the trap. Then the disappearance. And when I finally got Crystal alone again, she said something that made me feel both sick and determined. You know what's funny, she whispered. What? He wasn't scared when I got arrested, she said. I called him crying and he sounded calm. Calm. Like he already knew. Like it was planned. I went home that night and wrote one sentence across the page in big letters. He has done this before. And as I stared at those words, one thought came to me like a warning. If I could find one woman with this story. There were more. Which meant Sophie wasn't the first. And unless someone stopped him, she wouldn't be the last. But here's what I didn't realize yet. The moment I started writing names down. The moment I started connecting dots. I stopped being an old volunteer. I became a problem. And in a place like that, problems don't stay unnoticed for long. Because the next shift, I felt it. A presence. A weight in the doorway. Someone watching me. Not Sophie. Not an inmate. A guard. Standing still, arms crossed, eyes locked on me like he already knew exactly what I was doing. And the look on his face said one thing clear as day. Stop. The next Tuesday, I arrived early. Not because I was eager. Because I needed time to steady myself before I stepped inside. The sky was dull and heavy, the kind of gray that makes everything look like it's holding its breath. I parked in my usual spot and sat there for a moment with my hands in my lap. My notebook was in my bag. It felt heavier than it should. Like it wasn't paper. Like it was evidence. Like it was danger. I told myself I was being paranoid. But prison teaches you something very fast. If your gut is warning you, listen. I walked toward the entrance with my shoulders back, head high, the way I always did when I worked here. A guard nodded at me. I nodded back. Normals. Casual. Nothing to see. But the moment I passed through security, and the first steel door slammed behind me, I felt it. That shift in the air. That quiet tension that doesn't show up on cameras, but you feel it in your skin. I reached the library, greeted Ms., started my routine. Book cart. Returns. Shelves. The simple motions that made me look harmless. And then I saw him. Officer. Standing in the doorway. Arms crossed. Not speaking. Not moving. Just watching. I knew. I'd known him years ago, back when I was still staff. He was the kind of guard who never raised his voice, but always made people feel small. Mean eyes. A smile that never reached them. He used to ignore me when I was just the library lady. But now his attention felt like a spotlight. I kept working as if I didn't notice. Because the second rule of prison, right after keep your head down, is this. Never show fear to someone looking for it. Stayed there a full 10 minutes. Then 15. Then 20. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The message was clear. I see you. My heart pounded, but I forced my hands to keep moving. A woman came in to check out a book. I scanned the barcode. Beep. Stamped the due date. Sump. Smiled politely. Everything normal. But inside, my thoughts were racing like sirens. Because I was old, yes. But I wasn't helpless. I knew exactly what a guard like did when he decided someone was a problem. He could restrict access. Delay approvals. Whisper to the right people. And in a building like this, whispers spread faster than truth. I caught Sophie's eyes briefly across the room. She was behind the desk again, her posture straight, her expression neutral. But her hands moved a little quicker than usual. She knew something was off too. At the end of my shift, I pushed my cart back into storage, signed out, and started toward the exit. That's when stepped into my path. Mrs. Fletcher. His voice was calm. Too calm. Yes, I replied. He tilted his head, slightly like he was studying me. We need to talk about your volunteer clearance. My stomach tightened. What about it? He smiled. A thin smile. There have been concerns. Concerns, I repeated. He leaned in just a little, not enough to be obvious, but enough to make it feel personal. About you spending too much time with certain inmates, asking questions about their cases. My pulse jumped. I kept my face blank. I'm helping them find legal resources, I said. That's part of library work. Smile didn't move. Right, he said slowly. Well, we're going to need to restrict your access a bit. My mouth went dry. Restrict. You'll be limited to the main library area, he said. No more visits to the cell blocks. No lingering in hallways. No private conversations. I felt heat rise up my neck. And whose authority is this on? I asked. His eyes stayed steady. Mine. That was the moment I understood. This wasn't protocol. This was a warning. He'd noticed me. And he wanted me contained. I held his gaze. For years, I said, quiet but sharp, I worked in this facility. I followed every rule. He shrugged like it didn't matter. Then you shouldn't have a problem following them now. He stepped aside like he'd just done me a favor. I walked out of there with my jaw clenched so hard it hurt. In the car, I sat gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned pale. Because now I had confirmation. I wasn't imagining things. Someone on the inside didn't like what I was doing. And that meant I was getting closer than they wanted. 2 weeks later, I came home and found my mailbox hanging open. The little metal door was bent, like someone had it with force. My breath caught. I walked up slowly, every nerve in my body screaming. Inside was one single piece of plain white paper. No envelope. No stamp. Just a note. Block letters. Black marker. 2 lines. Stop askng questions. Or you'll regret it. I stood there holding that note, and for the first time since Sophie's arrest, I felt real fear. Not the fear of a courtroom. Not the fear of a prison. The fear of being in my own home and realizing someone had already crossed the line into my life. I looked up and down the street. Quiet. Normals. Neighbors' houses, parked cars, wind moving through bare branches. Nothing out of place. Which somehow made it worse. Because it meant whoever did this knew how to move without being seen. I went inside, locked the door, then locked it again like that would make it stronger. I sat on my couch with the lights off and stared through the curtains like I was waiting for something. Anything. But nothing happened that night. Or the next. Still, the note stayed in my mind like a stain. I thought about calling the police. But what would I say? Someone told me to stop investigating my granddaughter's case. They'd tell me to let the system handle it. They'd tell me I was grieving. They'd tell me to back off for my safety. And that was exactly what whoever wrote that note wanted. For me to feel alone. Small. Scared. Like I had no choice. But then I pictured Sophie in that orange uniform. I pictured her shaking hands. That bruise on her cheek. And I felt something stronger than fear rise up in me. Anger. Not loud anger. Not reckless anger. The kind of anger that has patience. The kind that survives. I took the note and placed it inside my notebook like it belonged there. Because it did. It was proof of something. Proof that my questions mattered. Proof that I'd hit a nerve. And then I made a decision. It was going to limit what I could do inside the prison. I would find another way. Because I had spent my whole life learning how systems work. And I knew this one truth. A locked door is just a challenge to a determined person. The next Tuesday, I went back in. Was waiting in the parking lot, leaning against his patrol car like he owned the world. He watched me walk toward the entrance. Slow. Steady. Like he wanted to see if I'd flinch. I didn't. I walked past him without a word. Inside, I found Amy. A younger volunteer, maybe 25, bright-eyed, kind face, still had full access to places I no longer could go. She waved when she saw me. Mrs. Fletcher, hi. I smiled like everything was normal. Then I lowered my voice. Amy, can I ask you a favor? She blinked, sure. I looked around carefully, then leaned closer. I need you to talk to a few women for me, I said. Not about trouble, about their cases. Amy's smile faded into confusion. What kind of cases? The ones where a boyfriend disappears, I said quietly. Drug trafficking, plea deals, young women who swear they didn't know. Amy stared at me. And for a second, I thought she'd say no. That she'd back away. That fear would win. But then she swallowed and nodded. Okay, she whispered, I'll help. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was getting bigger. More dangerous. But also stronger. Because now, even if they watched me, they couldn't watch everyone. I drove home that day with my notebook on the passenger seat, the warning note tucked inside. And I knew one thing for sure. They could scare me. They could limit me. They could threaten me. But they couldn't stop what had already started. Because I was done being polite. Done being quiet. Done being the kind of woman who accepts what everyone else calls the truth. And if you're still here with me, then you already know what's coming next. Because the very next name Amy brought back to me was a name that didn't just match the pattern. It matched something else. Something official. Something traceable. Something that could finally lead us to Brandon's real identity. And once we had that, everything was going to explode. So tell me in the comments, if you were me, would you have stopped after that note, or would you have kept going?